The evolution of architectural practice has been relatively slow towards change, yet modern shifts in business and design management have prompted today's leading architects to rethink how they work. Practice Disrupted is a podcast hosted by Evelyn Lee, who's on your left, and Janine Chastain, who is on the bottom of our screen. Evelyn Lee is an architect, design strategist, and the senior experience designer at Slack. Who knows what Slack is? So roughly half of the class is familiar with Slack. Slack is one of the big success stories coming out of the last recession. One of the, here's a need created by challenge, and Slack is one of the companies that came out of that. And her co-host is Janine Chastain. She's an architecture business strategy consultant. And Janine and I have known each other for quite a while. Thanks for joining us, both of you. Together, Evelyn and Janine set out to illuminate, you were almost eliminating the future, illuminating the future of the profession to help architects remain relevant and valuable in a changing world. On Practice Disrupted, they explore how technology, cultural shifts, and emerging best practices are prompting firm owners to assess their business models and make adjustments to their studios. Each one of their episodes features an industry leader, and together with Evelyn and Janine, they explore the new frontier of architectural practice. And one of the things that I want you to do before next week is to find Practice Disrupted, and I'll give you a link for that. Scroll through the episodes, find one that sounds interesting, listen to it, and just jot down a few big takeaways from one of those episodes. What episode is out right now for Practice Disrupted?
Tomorrow we're going to have a new one going live on new lines of service, so how to create a multidisciplinary firm.
Okay. What episode number is that?
11.
That's 11.
So in 11 episodes, they've talked to a lot of really cool people with a lot of differing backgrounds. So I think you'll enjoy. Scroll through, just pick one, listen to it, and then what are your big takeaways from that episode? You guys want to talk about Practice Disrupted?
Sure.
All right. So
where do you want us to start?
Well,
I'm going to try to get away from these two. Sorry.
Sorry.
Evelyn's modeling like the new work from home lifestyle of
my
parents.
My nanny called in sick this morning, so yes.
So Evelyn is in San Francisco area, right?
I'm in the Bay Area, yes.
In the Bay Area. Janine, are you in Charlotte? Is that right?
I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Raleigh. Okay. So opposite ends of the country. Why don't we start with, why would you start a podcast called Practice Disrupted?
Do you want to take it first?
Sure. So first of all, I want to know how many of you can just raise your hands because I can see you. How many of you have worked in an architect's office? Okay, so you guys all have had most of you have had the experience of what that feels like and what the studio environment's like in a professional setting. Okay, cool. I can't see you smile, but I can see the hands and the nods. This is good.
We're all about thumbs up and
you can
let us other ways to let us know how you're feeling.
Yeah, and you guys, if you guys have questions also, you can stop us or ask questions. We are open to that. So Evelyn and I both practiced in California for several years before we kind of had career shifts, and basically we both were realizing that there are a lot of trends in practice that it just seems like at the speed that the world is moving, that architecture as an industry and certainly architecture firms are not changing that rapidly. They seem to be, from my personal experience, they seem to be really holding on to looking towards the past rather than looking forward towards the possibilities of what the world could be. So we kept seeing these trends, and we'll talk about some of those today, of where there wasn't a lot of change going on. And Evelyn and I had already started talking about how that was something that needed to be addressed so that architecture studios could be more agile and better prepared to work with their clients and deliver projects in a more efficient and expedited way. Hey, Kenley. And basically we started having a conversation about that, and then about the time that we were working on that, of course the pandemic started, so you all know how disruptive that's been, and so ultimately we decided that we wanted to look at these trends in a critical way and start talking about them in a very transparent way to explore, like, what are these themes. And I think it's kind of an evolving conversation. It's certainly not all fleshed out.
Yeah, and I think when you guys are actually lucky to have Jeff in the way that he's presenting professional practice. If I look at the professional practice curriculums of a lot of universities, including when I was in school,
Evelyn, we
it's really.
can't. Hey, Evelyn.
Can you
Yeah,
hear me now?
that's better.
Is
Thank
that
you.
better?
Yep.
Sorry. So, so I was saying that it's really interesting the way that Jeff has set up the curriculum for you guys, because if you look at professional practice in the majority of universities, especially when I was in school, you were literally just walking through the chapters of like the architect's handbook on professional practice. I think we spent like a whole, I don't know, 2 weeks on designing your letterhead, designing your like logo for your firm. And really, when it comes to business operations and being entrepreneurial, that's one of actually the kind of least things we worry about. I think we worry about it just because inherently we're designers. Um, so yeah, we actually both have our MBAs too. So we were really interested in, we were immersed back in school and seeing how other companies were getting started, seeing how other industries were really evolving over time. And meanwhile, we were listening to the architects complain about how many services we're giving away to project managers or construction administrators, or architects tend to complain a lot. I'm very transparent, so I'm probably going to say something that I regret through this, but just letting you know. But anyways, so we're looking to find ways to reclaim that value rather than complaining about everything we're giving away. And for us, that's really new business models. What other services could architects be providing? And then also, what is the type of culture that you need to be supporting in a firm to grow and nurture the future of the profession?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to it. There's the external things that are happening in the world, and then the things that are internal to the firm and the industry. And we're looking at both and all of the variables of change that are influencing the way that architects are practicing currently and how they might be doing it better.
So when you're looking at those things and understanding your background, that it's probably, I'd say it's a little bit diverse because as the three of us have had conversations in the past, there are obviously a lot of people that are thinking in what I'm going to call the old way, right? There are a lot of firms out there that just traditional firms. Things are changing. What sorts of business innovations are you seeing and hearing about through these conversations?
Yeah, so well, I guess I'll start. So Jeff knows this, but I actually worked at a firm called MK Think. You can Google them. They're out of San Francisco. They started a strategy group, mostly because they found by the time clients bring architects to the table, they are coming to the table. They already have a capital plan in place. They've raised money for the building. They've probably programmed out the building, but like architects have kind of very little say what actually goes beyond the design, what actually goes into the building by the time clients put out an RFP to an architect. So they developed a strategy group to get ahead of this. And that strategy group did everything related to the built environment, but it wasn't necessarily building. So for instance, we helped Oakland Unified School District look at which schools they should shut down because they saw an influx in population and they actually had to look at closing their schools. So how do you take data, census data, where people are living, where people are moving to, and make an argument that, you know, a whole public can get behind to decide which schools to close. We also did something very different for, oh my goodness, Kenley, for the San Francisco Unified School District. So the majority of students that go to public schools, even in San Francisco, rely on the school district for food. So how does a school district go from serving one meal a day to potentially serving 2 meals a day? So our strategy group went in and we did an overview of all the kitchens in the K through 12 system there in Santa Fe, and then we decided, you know, where is the best place given kitchen equipment um, to have a central kitchen for SFUSD, and then how far do we have to par cook the food before delivering it on site, and what does that mean to, like, and in that process that we developed, you know, how much money can we save putting a central kitchen in one part of San Francisco versus in another part of San Francisco. You've never wanted to participate so much. Um, so that's an area where that type of work can actually lead to built work, but it also is an area where our potential clients, even public clients, are calling in, are bringing us in much earlier, bringing us as an architects in much earlier. I know, Janine, if you want to talk to some of the services that even Cho Thompson is doing right now. But now let's go take care of this little one.
Sure. So I think, Jeff, when you emailed me or you Slacked us, actually, we were communicating on Slack. It was really interesting because you mentioned traditional versus non-traditional, which I realized in the podcast we talk about a lot. So I know that your assignment this semester, you're going to be like designing your own new innovative way to look at architecture. So I think it's first important to think about what the traditional model is and kind of define it. So let's just revisit that for a second. And I'm sure you're going to have other guest speakers who might touch on this a little bit more too. But in a traditional architecture firm, the architect is the kind of the master organizer of all of the trades that are happening in terms of designing and creating the drawings that will inform the built product of what will be constructed in the field. And so you guys have all probably, if you've worked in an architecture firm, you know that you're working on drawings, you're probably building in a Revit model, or you're using CAD or ArchiCAD or something like that. And basically what you're doing is you're bringing together all of these different pieces of design information and organizing it into a system that you can give to a general contractor to build. And in a studio environment, usually an architectural practice is built around founders who have historically been the you know, owner of the firm. They might have partners that buy into the firm, and then you have a studio of people around those individuals who basically do a lot of the production work. I'm not looking at the camera. I'm like looking at you guys on the screen and I don't know where to look. This is the weirdest thing. Maybe I should look up here. Anyway, so I think that it's really interesting to think about like what has been replicated over and over and over again is like this idea of basically a design studio that produces drawings to create a building. That is kind of at its most simplest form, the business model of architecture. And you create money by producing the drawings and and building something for your client. Now, there have been variations of that over the years, and you see some firms that they add services, like they might offer also interior design, or they might add urban design, or they might have engineering, like AECom would be an example of that, where you have more of an AE discipline. Then you have other business models where they partner with the contractor, and so it's the architect and the contractor, and it gets into design build type work. I think what we're really interested in is going a much further beyond that, and to think about the role that the architect can play in contributing beyond just a building. In our episode that you're going to hear tomorrow, if you listen to it, we talk about new service lines, and the firm that's the case study, they not only will design a building, they design furniture. They also have multidisciplinary staff on their team that can do graphic design work, and basically anything that the client's building that or coming to them for, from strategy about how the operations of the business works up to the built final architecture, is something that they're working with their client on. And
I
so,
think,
oh yeah, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, one of the important things about this is the way that traditional practice is modeled. It is dependent on it's dependent upon a very, like, one of the most predictable economic cycles there is in history. It's the building cycle. So there will always be times when people are building, and there will inevitably be times when people are not building. And the traditional model means that when your clients aren't building, inevitably your firm is hurting. So we're also looking for what are models that help architect firms remain solvent, even through times when their clients aren't building.
Right. So I think the example that you'll hear tomorrow is probably like a hybrid model of a moderate step away from an architecture firm. We also got into interviewing people who stepped really far away. Like, we have one episode that's with a former executive that worked at WeWork and now has his own company, and he does something entirely different, where he took the skill set of architecture and applied it to basically being an entrepreneur and getting into tech startup. So we're kind of looking at everything in that spectrum, which is a really big spectrum, to be quite honest.
And then we also push it further. So we're crossing our fingers, but we just landed, for instance, an art director who works at Lucasfilms. So it's also, what can you do with your architectural education outside of practice? That if we elevate those voices, I think more people will actually understand the value of the way we think as architects, and what that means to a variety of different applications.
Have you talked to anyone yet, or do you have anybody scheduled that is taking their architectural education and or professional experience into politics?
We haven't gone that way on this yet, but in some of my past work, I've done that. And I know that there are definitely a lot of architects that are actually elected and appointed leaders in different capacities. So it is something that I've personally been involved in the research on.
One of the things that struck me when actually both of you were talking about Evelyn was talking about the cycle, right? The building cycle. You see this disjointed hand. The building cycle and there's a tail, right? Building cycle goes up and down, and the firms are following. The successive firms are following. And you were describing the traditional model where, okay, we're designing something, we're producing documents, it goes to a GC or C and whatever, and it gets built. The thing that I've always thought is incredibly, I don't know if ironic is the right word, but what's the value of an architect, design thinking, skills and everything, versus what you're actually getting paid to produce, right? When architects are tying their value to the lowest common denominator, essentially to the commoditized effort. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I guess what Jeff is saying is, how familiar are you guys with like the various different stages of a project? So there's like schematic design, design development, CDs, and
So
CAs.
everybody understand SD, DD, CD, etc. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so I would argue, and I think a lot of architects would argue that our highest value is actually in SDs, right? It's in the schematic design and design development. But most of our time and most of our billable hours goes to CDs, which is just the pure documentation of our design and thought process, turning it into a building. So uh, to Jeff's point, like another thing we're looking at is how do we help clients understand the value of the design thinking, right, and get paid higher for actually strategic problem solving versus kind of just the grind of the bathroom
Production.
details and production that go into buildings.
So let's come back to this idea about commodity, because I think, Evelyn, you're the perfect person to talk about it. So do you guys understand like where the conversion happens on how architects make money? Um, does anyone want to try and offer a suggestion of where you think that happens?
Can you expand? Can you expand on the question a little bit?
Sure. So when you inside of the firm, basically, I guess what I'm trying to prompt you on is, in order to earn money, in order to bill your client, where in what the architect does is that value being generated that you then go bill your client? It's a service business, so that's a hint. What would be the value that you're giving them in the current traditional model of architecture that equates to money? The answer is time. Basically, you're giving your time, and if you guys have ever worked in a firm, then they get really sensitive about your timesheet being submitted on Monday morning because they want to be able to document how many hours did you work, because based on the firm, everybody has a price for each hour that they work in that office, that they can, if you're putting time on somebody's project, then that means that I go to my client and I can bill them for your time at an overhead rate, which is much higher than what you're getting paid. So in terms of commodity, Evelyn, I wanted to come back to one of our conversations that we had about that, and not looking at how we might even innovate on not billing just on time, but value alone.
Can we pause that for 1 second?
Sure.
Yeah.
Has anybody been exposed to the accounting side? I mean, I'm assuming when you're working in the firm, you're submitting a timesheet, like Janine was saying, right? So you've been exposed to that. Are you familiar with the idea of the multiplier? Right? They're paying you $10 an hour, hopefully more than that, but they're billing you out at $25, $35, $40 an hour. So you're familiar with that concept, right? So what Janine is describing, what Evelyn's about to talk about, is this idea that essentially in that scenario, you're trading dollars, you're trading time for dollars, I guess is the right order in what I just described. So, and that's a very traditional model and again, I said this earlier, a lot of what we're talking about spreads all the way through professional services. Accounting is similar, attorneys are similar, engineers are similar, but in my opinion, and I think probably at least the three of us share that opinion, there might be a break in that model for some reason. So press play again. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just got a request from my kids. Janine, can you give me can you just start this conversation for 1 minute?
Yeah,
I just need to start.
sure. So, so what, let's see, where to go from here? I think what the point of this is that when you bill for time alone and you're selling a professional service, there is a cap on how much you can earn, because you either are going to be constrained by the number of hours that you can work in a given week, which you guys probably know, architects work a lot of hours, or you're going to be constrained by how much your client is willing to pay you for those hours. So those become two variables that you don't always have control over, that can push your profit margins down. And one thing that Evelyn and I get really excited about is thinking about, okay, as a service industry, how might we structure that financial relationship a little bit differently, so that it doesn't mean that I have to sit at my desk for 60 hours a week in order to earn what I'm trying to bring in for the firm. Are there ways to create channels of revenue back into my business that doesn't mean that I have to sit here in front of a computer to create money?
Yeah, okay. Now I can take this. Sorry, they asked for a movie to get started, so hopefully that'll hold them for a while. For instance, this is a non-architecture related, but MK Think sits on top of a product design firm that's best known for delivering they were the innovative designers behind Dr. Dre's Beats headphones. So when Dr. Dre did the RFP, the call for product designers, they were shortlisted and they showed up with a presentation and a price proposal. Said, this is how much it's going to cost us to design this product for you, not dissimilar from how architects deliver architectural services. And Dr. Dre turned around and said, wait, well, I want you to have more skin in the game. Like, I want this product to, I want the success of this product to be yours, but I also want you to take on greater risk. So they ended up doing an equity agreement around Dr. Dre Beats headsets. So ultimately, what it meant is that the firm owner had to do a second mortgage on his house, and he had to front the entire project. But when Apple bought Dr. Dre Beats headsets, he more than made back all of that money and then some. So are there other arrangements that can get you back, that can help pay you back, that goes outside of the traditional professional service models? And the way architects could do this, even if you're looking at building projects, you can look at an equity stake. You can look at partial ownership. I know there's some architects out there that actually do partial ownership of a condominium building. Like they get so many of the units that they can then do what they want, hold on to it or sell it. So there are different models out there that not a lot of architecture firms are looking at, but it can bring in on a much higher basis than kind of time for fee money into the firm.
The thing that I really like about the Beats story, and it's a bit of an extreme example, right? But the thing that I like about that is what you're actually describing is a trade of, on some level, not a trade, but on some level being paid for the value that you create. And if we think more about how that can be applied throughout the profession, what value are you creating? I used to, in a firm that I used to work for, we did a lot of renovations of commercial buildings that housed restaurants and bars. And I remember when one of our bar owner clients, who actually owned several bars, said, you know what? He was a jerk. He was just a jerk. He was really hard to work for. But there were moments of clarity and honesty that he usually tried to use to lord over you. But one of the things that he said to me was, after arguing over fees, back and forth and back and forth, he said, you know what? It really doesn't matter what I pay you for these services, because the fact of the matter is that once this project is complete, I'm the new hot bar, and I'll make that money back in a month. All right. And so, first of all, that's a slap in your face, because, hey, I just negotiated you down to, some unsustainable number. But that aside, say, okay, well, if I'm creating that value for that owner, then what should my fee really be? You've got to convince someone to pay a number. But I think it's an interesting concept to talk about the value you're creating versus the lines being paid hourly for the lines that are on the paper.
And there's also,
go ahead, Evelyn.
Like ongoing. So if you look at technology, right? If you even look at, actually, I haven't done video games online in a while, but we've gone from the game cartridge to now it's all software as a service, right? You pay a membership subscription fee that's ongoing. So rather than that one point of sale, it's how do you get money in perpetuity? And over the lifetime of the building, that could actually mean, if architects could get more involved in the operations maintenance of their building over the lifespan of the building, there's another opportunity there to continue to earn. One, you want your systems designed efficiently and heartily, especially if you're going to have to maintain them in the long term. So you're committed to that. But two, then, you can kind of continue to get paid upon that value over time, especially if you've designed really well systems and your maintenance of them is very minimal.
So I think as you guys think about your projects, I would just recommend getting really clear about what is the value that you're adding, and defining that when you come up with your innovative solution, so that you can think about how you might offer pricing or just diversify your offering in some way.
Before we got online with you, we went through an exercise where we broke up into 6 teams and just sort of brainstormed the problems that architects can help solve. So in your experience, and as you've started producing the podcast, what would you say is the most left field problem that you've run across that any, and I don't even know if we call them architecture firms necessarily, but what's the most left field problem that you have run into that architects are solving? Does that make sense?
Well, Evelyn, can I jump in first before we answer this? I want to just come back to this concept that I want to touch on before we answer this question, which is the drivers of change. So you guys asked, why did we start the podcast? I'm going to name a couple, and then I want to kind of hear from you guys what you think some of the drivers of change that are influencing change in the world, change in the way architects practice, all of those things. So number one, technology. Technology has changed everything for everyone over the past 20 years. We function as a society completely differently than we used to before we had cell phones and before we had computers, and before we had access to all of these tools. And that has influenced another driver of change, which is the speed of communication. So we're able to talk just right now, from Raleigh in my own house, I'm able to be in your classroom and talk to you guys. That is amazing. I mean, really, truly. I think another really big one is generational differences in the workplace. So we have a lot of different generations working together right now. We have boomers, we have Gen Xers, we have millennials, we have Gen Z, and then we have some other groups that are identified in between those. And it's creating a lot of different conversations and practice. Then we have the cultural changes happening in the world, in the United States, in your state, in your community, in your neighborhood. We have a global focus on business innovation that's coming out of a technology boom. Tech is influencing how business is changing. So the business model has completely changed because of tech. And the last one I'll mention is the pandemic, which is pretty significant. So I'm wondering if you guys have any others that you might add to that list.
Anybody think of any drivers of change?
Ooh, that's a really good one. What else?
The health of individuals.
Health, yeah, I agree. That is a new conversation, especially with the pandemic, but I think it's yeah, it's a really important one.
Expectations from clients. You have the new software, why can't you get this faster?
Yes, 100%. That, I think, even expedited after the Great Recession. I'm going to call it the Great Recession just because it was really particularly greatly traumatizing to me. But after the recession, clients wanted everything faster, cheaper, and I think architecture firms had a harder time being able to hire back staff that they had cut. And so the expectations from our clients certainly always influence what we're able to deliver.
I think another one is also the population growth in like urban cities. Like a lot of urban areas are moving into cities, like, so we have this boom of construction everywhere.
Yes. So you can see that just in that short list alone, and I know there's so many more, that there are so many things influencing why things are changing so much right now. So I would recommend that you guys think about the ones that are significant to you, that you feel really passionate about, and include them in how you're thinking about your work this semester.
I think one that wasn't actually mentioned is the global connectivity of all the communications too, right? We're much more aware of not what's only going in our community, but what's going on globally.
That's a really good one. You know, I mentioned before that I host a show for architects every day. So context and clarity. It's basically it's a Facebook Live show that I host at 4 p.m. Eastern every day. And so I log in, I start doing this show, and then somebody in California joins, and then somebody in Boston joins, and then somebody in Scotland joins, and someone in Ghana, and someone in Nigeria, and someone in the Philippines. And you start thinking about that, and I'm sitting in my basement, right, in Indianapolis, Indiana, and suddenly I'm having a conversation in real time with people all the way around the globe, from California all the way to the Philippines, right? And that global connectivity is just mind-boggling. And so the format of this show is we're talking about issues for architects. These are architects from all around the world, and I can say, hey, Bright, he's a guy that's in Ghana. What's it like in Ghana? You know, this is what it's like in the United States. This is what it's like in Indiana. And actually, he asked a question today. Someone mentioned construction administrator, and he said, "Is that like?" I forget what term he used, but he was making the correlation, right? They've got a different term where they are, but it's the same thing. And so we're essentially comparing notes around the world on what the practice of architecture is like.
Yeah, and then I think, sorry, Janine, I know you were going somewhere with this, but the other thing that I get really geeky about is also the amount of data we're collecting, right? So anywhere you're carrying a cell phone, anywhere you're carrying, like there's all those, you know, that story about how people found out where secret US military bases were because they were wearing their Fitbits and you could see them running around a track at a certain time every single day. Um, with the whole Internet of Things, um, there's actually there's a bike app. It begins with an S. I use this case study all the time. I can't remember the name of it. But anyways, people, whenever they go for bikes on it, you know, they want to track their workout, so they turn on the bike app, and it shows them where they've gone, how far they've gone. They actually make that app company actually makes a lot of money selling that data to city governments to help them craft where they should put bike lanes, because it's where people are most commonly taking their bikes. So also like the use of all of this data around how we move throughout the cities, how we move throughout the buildings, how you move throughout the campus is something that I really kind of get interested in.
I was going to ask Evelyn, do you have an example to Jeff's question of like what you think is a really innovative case study for architects? I mean, I was thinking I don't think it's the most innovative, but I think the episode we did with Ilya was really cool because he's basically, you know, rather than chasing the most glamorous projects, like he's going after low income projects for communities in need. So we think that that's pretty amazing because he's figured out how to financially make it work so that he can actually do work that is meaningful and purposeful to him. So I think that's pretty outside the box.
Yeah,
like
I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say I think you need you know who you need to get on here. Well, I don't know if he'd do it now. Is Anthony Venke, right? Because he worked at MIT's City Lab, and they were doing a lot of interesting things with data, just like data visualization that then they could sell to various different resources. And at one point, City Lab was he had this exercise that looked at how many pings went off of somebody's cell phone, whether it was a message or a call. Like it was during it was the year that Italy won the World Cup. They were tracking cell phone pings in Italy, and it was just they tracked it over time, and you could see when each goal happened. You know, but how do you take all this data around people, where people are gathering, how people are celebrating, all related to kind of the built environment and the fabric of the city, and use that data in a way that actually you can continue to craft, you know, gathering spaces in the city. But yeah, I don't know, Jeff. There's a lot of architects doing a lot of other things too, and that's one thing that we're exploring.
Yeah, I think for me, the most
Yeah.
innovative ones are where they step all the way away from architecture and use it I mean, that's what we talk about is like, you guys are getting an education in design thinking and problem solving, and using that skill set on anything is kind of interesting. I mean, we're looking at like, what does that training do when you bring it into a different industry entirely? So for me, that's what's innovative. And then anything inside our industry is kind of like I don't know. I think it's like everybody's experimenting right now, to be honest, to try and figure out the way that they can push the boundaries on within that constraint of still practicing architecture, but still doing something else that's innovative. So it looks and feels a lot of different ways based on the different entrepreneurs and architects that you talk to.
Well, let's take it, so just real quickly, because I do want to leave a few minutes for the class to ask questions, but let's take it the opposite direction for a second and say, okay, well, these are the most innovative and maybe thinking outside the traditional profession. Who have you talked to? What have you seen? What are your case studies for maybe it's just half a step beyond the quote unquote traditional practice. What are you seeing in that direction?
I mean, I think like, so obviously being in San Francisco, I'm seeing a lot of architects transition to the software side. You know, what does that mean from a user design experience? The other interesting thing is a lot of people complain that the software companies call themselves architects. Like they say, if you go on Indeed.com or Monster.com and you search for architect, a lot of the architects complain that there's all these software architects and companies, but the way they problem solve is actually very similar to how we problem solve in 3 dimensions. So, there's definitely people that is going out there and embracing that and then applying it to coding. We talked on the podcast. We talked with David Dano, who got his MArch from Columbia. He came out and he worked at Shop Architects in New York, mostly on the production side. And he developed this service firm called Case that he eventually sold to WeWork. And then when he was working in WeWork, he led up professional development within WeWork. So he grew WeWork from like a 500 company firm to what it was a year ago before he left and before WeWork got in trouble. And now he is running an organization. He started a venture-backed organization called Teal HQ, which is really looking at, how do we make the job hunting experience better for the job hunters, and how do we build a community around that? So he's somebody who has completely deviated from, I would say completely deviated from traditional practice, but he believes that a lot of what he does is because of what he learned in architecture school. And then, yeah, we're getting an art director from Lucasfilms. She's currently working on Mandalorian 2. So I don't know if you guys have access to Disney Plus, but I just watched the technology behind The Mandalorian, the first one. They have a docu-series right now. If you go watch the technology one, it's amazing. So they filmed that whole series in what they call the volume, which means that like their film screen they're using all this gaming technology, but she's informing this just the design of the future in Lucasfilms.
Mhm. I would say of the traditional like architecture firms, our guests that we had this season, there's 3 firms that I would say you could look at. Nels Long, he works at Roto Lab, and that's a paired company with Roto Architects. So that would be a very technology focused about how they're looking at architecture and technology in order to create diverse products. Ilya, he works at Plus Lab Architects in New York, and his model is more about how do you do social justice design, but still do it at a high level. And so his funding is working with government agencies in order to solve for resiliency issues. And then we just had an interview last week with Karen Timberlake, and I would say their innovation is around research. So they're trying to figure out how do they do research in an architecture firm and then integrate the outcomes of that research into their project work. So that's a really interesting model too.
That's great. So we just got a couple minutes left, and I want to be respectful of your time, and we'll have to wrap up class here before too long. But what questions do you have for these two? Anyone?
I suspect they're going to have more questions after they listen to our episodes.
One of the reasons that I'm glad to have Janine and Evelyn on as our first guest speakers is because when we were talking earlier about your semester project, and somebody asked about the speakers, I guess, right? what kind of speakers should we line up? Well, that was a really wide swath of basically everything right there that they talked about. That's what I'm interested in. Explore. What problems can you solve? What problems are out there? What problems need to be solved? What are the different models? If you want to get someone from Lucasfilm or Amazon or whatever, that's game, right? It's all fair game. The question is, what are you going to build between now and the end of the semester? So they've laid a lot on you, and you can check out the podcast and see who all they've interviewed, because it is a variety of people that have been guests in the first 11 episodes.
And I think one, Jeff, I don't know if this is on your reading list, but something that I always recommend, and that was on one of my reading lists in an entrepreneurship class that I had when I was getting my MBA, is called a Blue Ocean Strategy. The primary case study in there, I think, is something that we all can relate to. It's the idea of the three-ring circus and how it most nearly died, mostly because of the most expensive asset of the three-ring circus, which is the animals and what it takes to transport and maintain them. And they look at how essentially Cirque du Soleil flipped the three-ring circus model on its head and developed what they call a blue ocean strategy, meaning like a whole new category of entertainment that essentially brought the circus to life with only human performers.
That was,
and made it an adult date night out again, instead of like a thing you can only do with the kids too.
that is a good read. We may add that to the reading list.
Oh, sorry for the book ad. Yes.
They do not have a required reading list. They have recommended reads, so we can add it without too much pain.
Well, I think I just would add, I think it's your time to explore and innovate. And like, if there are firms that you want to research, use this opportunity to learn about those firms and talk to different leaders, ask them about their business model. And if you guys have questions, you can always ask us. We're available to answer your questions.
Appreciate that. Any questions before we let them go? Anyone? Nothing? All right. Well, ladies, thank you very much. Great to see you on the screen. Enjoy your special day. I'll leave it at that. And I appreciate it. Keep up the good work on the podcast.
Thanks for having us, Jeff.
All right.
Bye, guys. Nice to meet you. Bye.
All right, so let's make the video wrap up really simple. We'll just keep this running and it's recording, so this will just be our video wrap up. Biggest takeaway, anybody? Biggest takeaway from this conversation with Evelyn and Janine. Go ahead.
Finding a different
means of payment other than time. I love that one. This is one that I can't stress this enough with architects that I talk to. It's the idea of trading dollars for hours or hours for dollars. To me, is just insane, right? They started to describe it there, and I don't know if you caught on to it, but basically what they were saying was that there is no way to scale a firm if you're solely trading hours for dollars. The only way that you can make more money is to either work more. Who wants to do that? Right? You're probably already working 60 hours a week. Who wants to work 70 just to make another dollar? Or convince a client that that it's okay to raise your rates from $100 an hour to $150 an hour, while at the same time the client's going, how do I get this cheaper and faster? Right? So if we're trading in the traditional model that I think it was Janine was describing it, of trading the hours for dollars, there's no way to scale your firm or add more people, right? Which then there's a limit to that as well. So it's a great takeaway. Somebody else said their hand up. Same one? Okay, go ahead.
Kind of going off of that, I was saying how architects could get involved in after, after the building is built, a bunch of maintenance, if it's like the lifetime of the building, maybe start to get money from that, to support that as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Think about what an architect, even in a traditional model, right? You're designing things, you're specifying materials, you're probably in concert with engineers, you're affecting the sustainability, the systems and everything else. Why wouldn't you be interested in having a stake in the way that building operated? Assuming that you have control of the right things. That's another big if. That's a good one. What was your big takeaway?
The thing is just contributing beyond the building, all the drivers that can go beyond the architecture.
Yeah, that's a good one. Remember, anytime you build something or someone builds what you design, you're impacting a lot of things. It's not just the end user, it's everyone around. Assuming that it's a building, or it could be a room, right, inside of a hospital or whatever. You're affecting a lot of things far beyond the things that were designed or modeled on paper. Anybody else?
We're getting an education in design and problem solving, and I like that they discussed, what does that look like in a different industry other than building design.
Yeah, that's a great one. At some point we'll discuss the reason that architects are inherently poor business people. You can go back and tell all your firm owners I said that. But it really comes down to the fact that you're being educated in design thinking and not in the business side of things, and there's a big disconnect there. But that design thinking, I think there's a reason that you're educated in that way. That is extremely valuable. You look at a firm, are you familiar with IDEO? ID, like Oreo, it's IDEO. They call themselves a design thinking firm, right? They come from all different walks of life. I imagine a lot of them are trained as architects, but they apply their consultations to product design, to organizational design, to just about anything that you can imagine. So there's a lot of value in that design thinking education. Someone else had their hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I liked how they were talking about getting different models in your firm to help even when the clients aren't building or renovating or doing something. I know our firm has the ebbs and flows of, hey, we're in a lull because no one's building. Hey, we're super jam-packed. Let's get all these things done.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest complaints. The longer you're around the profession, the complaint you're gonna. I don't know if people complain about it. Of course, you complain when things are down, right? But it's the feast or famine, right? Oh, building, and the architecture follows 9 months behind or something. It's always we're super busy, or we have no work, right? When the construction has taken off, or depending on what happens in the next 6 months with all the COVID, how it affects construction, there's a lot of nervousness right now across the country in the profession. What's the architectural billings index going to be 6 months from now, right? Is it going to be famine all of a sudden? One of the things that I like to push a lot is the idea, and I always think of it in terms of a timeline, moving left or right. The traditional model of an architecture firm generally gets hired when someone raises their hand and says, I need an architect, right? So if we say that's sort of the line in the sand, I need an architect. Okay, we'll be your architect. Right? Or it's an RFP or something, we'll compete for that. There's a lot that happens to the left of that on the timeline. Right? People are acquiring property. People are hiring legal counsel. They're looking at zoning issues. They're doing pro formas with developers. There may be as much or more money spent to the left of that point than there is to the right of that point, the design and construction. My encouragement to every architect is to think about how you can get involved to the left. How can you help people figure out what they can actually build on this site? I have an architect friend down in South Florida who's nearing retirement. She's 70, she might be like 72 years old now. She works with very few clients, but almost all of her work is with people trying to figure out what the possibilities are for this site. And she was telling me recently that she's like on design 4 iteration 6 for a site, and she's getting paid for all of this. Right? That's interesting. I don't even know what that means. But she's helping people figure out, again, back to my idea, and that's actually, I think, Slack. That's going back to the idea of your job is to make people's lives better. She's with this one client on whatever it was, design 4 iteration 6 or something. They're exploring and exploring and exploring how that client's life can be better based on what they can build here, what they can develop here, what the profit is, you know, what the impact on the community, and all those things. That's a great way to look at things. What can I do that, you know, pick whatever firm it is that you work for. What can I do that happens before my firm that I work for right now gets hired, traditionally speaking? Any other big takeaways? Nothing? All right, so we'll call that our video wrap up.